Monday, July 13th, 2020. This is the regular city council meeting for the city of St. Peter. We are holding an in-person meeting along with an electronic virtual meeting. It is 7:00 p.m. We will call the meeting to order. Would all please join in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We already took a roll. Everyone is here. Everyone should have a copy of the agenda in front of them. Are there any changes or corrections or additions to the agenda? If not, is there a motion to approve?
Noel will move.
Johnson will second.
Noel 1, Ed 2. All in favor of the agenda as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved. Next, we have the minutes from our June 22nd, 2020 regular meeting. Those minutes appear on pages 5 through 9. Are there any questions or changes to those minutes? If not, is there a motion to approve?
Ed will make a motion to approve.
Carrie Johnson will second.
Ed 1, Carrie 2, all in favor of the June 22nd regular meeting minutes as written, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Those minutes are approved. Next, we have the minutes from our June 30th, 2020 meeting. It was an emergency meeting for changing the poll location. Todd's going to have more update on that during his reports. Changing the poll location for the August 11th primary. Those minutes appear on page 10. Are there any changes or corrections to those minutes? If not, is there a motion to approve?
Carrie Johnson will second.
Emily 1, Carrie 2, all in favor of those minutes as written, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Those minutes are approved. Next, we'll address visitors. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to the council on any agenda item? Mr. Lee, which agenda item would you like to speak on?
Mr. Mayor, honorable members of the City Council, thank you for letting me be here tonight. I would like to speak on the EDA request from the Chamber of Commerce.
All right.
Regarding some help with advertising, promotion,
All right.
funding, that sort of thing.
When we get to that under new business, Ed, we will let you speak at that time. Okay? I just wanted to make.
I'll keep it very short.
That's you take up to 5 minutes if you need it. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to council on any agenda item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to the council on any matter whatsoever? Seeing no one, we will move to the consent agenda. The consent agenda begins in detail on page 11 and concludes with the resolution on page 27 and includes the following budgeted purchases in excess of $10,000 to Metering Tech Solutions for 200 AMI water meters for $27,600. To Bergerson Caswell for the well number 12 component installation for $13,650. Following license applications, 2 of them to the Capitol Room for on-sale liquor and Sunday liquor, location 419 South Minnesota for July 14th, 2020 to June 30th, 2021. A 3-2 beer off sale to Speedway at location 123 St. Julian for July 14th, 2020 to June 30th, 2021, plus the regular schedule of disbursements for June 18th, 2020 through July 8th, 2020. Are there any questions, comments about the consent agenda? Seeing no one, if not, is there a motion to approve?
Ed will make a motion to approve.
Noel will second.
Okay, Ed 1, Shannon 2. Now, any questions? Call the roll, please, Barb.
Councilmember DeBoss.
Aye.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Ed Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Noel. Aye. Councilmember Gary Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Grahams.
Aye.
Councilmember Bruflat. Aye.
Consent agenda is approved. Next, we have unfinished business, which we have none, so we will move to new business. And the first thing we have is the 2019 audit presentation. And Todd, do you want to introduce?
Mayor and members, Sally's here and Jim Eichten, your auditor, are here. Sally, I don't know if you have anything to add to this before Jim does his presentation?
Jim can do his presentation, but I just want everyone to know this was a remote audit for the most part. They came in February and did some preliminary work, their usual groundwork, and then almost everything else was done remote with our staffs and everything else. So it was a learning experience for our staff, but
Those of us participating remotely can't hear Sally.
Okay, let's do this. Thanks for saying that, Shannon.
Todd, you're pulling wires a little tight there.
can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay.
I saw a bunch of thumbs up.
Okay, so I just wanted to say that this audit was done primarily remotely with Jim's staff and my staff. They came down in early February and did a lot of their preliminary, or some of the prelim work that we usually do, but usually they're on site for at least a week to do the final work and ask questions. So we did a lot of scanning and back and forth and emails, but it worked out very well. And Jim will go through the audit results, but we had a very good audit this year.
All yours, Jim.
Thanks, Ally. Todd, do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, that'd be just fine. I think I've given you control of the presentation, so if you load it up on your computer, hit the share, you should be in good shape.
All right, great. Mayor, members, councils, thanks for having me this evening. My name is Jim Eichten. I'm the auditor for the city. Here this evening to give a presentation on the audit results for the year. I will share my screen here in a little bit, but I did want to give you some brief comments as Sally introduced me. Most of the audit results, or I won't say most, all of the audit results this year are good. The presentation this evening will go through that. Probably the highlight, of course, or maybe the low light in some people's minds was this audit was completed, in the middle of a pandemic. We most of the years would complete the audit by in the middle, probably April or May timeframe, and that was in the height of the pandemic occurrences. So one of the highlights for me in terms of this audit process is we were actually here this evening and giving an audit report. It's very challenging to complete an audit process, which typically would have taken place in on-site at the City Hall, and to complete it on a timely basis and submit the audit reports to the Office of State Auditor timely was certainly an accomplishment on the part of the city staff, but also my staff as well. So with that, I'll share my screen. There we go. It looks like it's up and running. So for the audit report, this is an audit report for the year ended December 31st, 2019, as you can see. The first comments I would like to make is certainly to understand the role of the auditor and the purpose for me being here this evening. It is a requirement in state law that the city have an audit of its financial activities. That particular audit requires an annual financial statement to be prepared. That financial statement is then required to be audited by an independent certified public accountant, which is my role with the city. The audit is guided by the Office of the State Auditor here in the state of Minnesota. as well as any other applicable requirements that are issued by the federal government or any other local standards. The American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, the AICPA, issues audit guidelines as well, which requires us to test a variety of areas, including the city's internal controls, in your compliance with laws and regulations that specifically relate to financial reporting. We're also required to issue your compliance with laws and regulations that relate to financial reporting. Probably the best example of that would be laws and regulations related to any grants that you receive. Grants typically come with laws, stipulations, or regulations. We typically audit your compliance with that. We also audit your compliance with Minnesota statutes. The list of Minnesota statutes that we audit are issued by the Office of the State Auditor. As a result, we don't issue an opinion on every statute that you're complying with, only those really that are applicable to the list provided. Lastly, based on standard, we're required to issue a report on your federal awards if the city were to receive more than $750,000 on an annual basis in federal revenues. That was not the case this year, so we did not complete an audit of that nature. The city has had single audits of federal awards in the past, and like any city, it tends to go up and down based on the level of federal funding received annually. So as part of my audit results, we issue what's called a management report, and in that management report, you'll find the format of that report is such that you could read the report and get an understanding on how the audit went with just reading the report and not having to listen to this presentation. So I'll touch on some of the highlights of that management report. First and foremost, we did issue what's called an unmodified opinion on the city's financial statements. It is a clean opinion. It was the opinion you were looking for going into the audit process. That particular opinion actually included what's called an emphasis of a matter. Previous to this year, the city issued financial statements that did not include compliance with GASB Governmental Accounting Standards, GASB 68 on pensions. The reason for that was the Fire Relief Association of the city is incorporated or is required to be incorporated into the city's financial reports using GASB 68 standards. Previously to this year, the Fire Relief Association did not have and was not providing adequate information to reporting compliance with GASB 68. This year, with some changes and implementation of new requirements and with cooperation with the Fire Relief Association, as well as the hiring of an actuary to complete the information, the city did comply with the new standards for this year. So that certainly is a highlight of this particular presentation. Anybody that's been with the city the last few years, you know that was an item of concern. Certainly the findings related to internal controls are also listed there. The city does have what I call a reportable item related to segregation of duties. The city staff within the accounting office of the city does not operate under perfect segregation of duties. So as part of our audit, we start our audit under the understanding that that is the case, and we report back to the city council that yes, the city doesn't have separation of duties within finance. So we did our audit under that understanding, really looking for what we call compensating controls that are in place that would allow for the city to operate appropriately in a financial reporting sense, and override any need to really operate under the segregation of duties perfect model. So that really, in terms of corrective action, there is no corrective action to really plan for there, other than to be under the end of the understanding that you are not operating with perfect internal controls. Lastly, we did issue one finding related to our testing with your compliance with Minnesota laws and regulations. So the city had a finding related to collateral. Minnesota statutes require the city or any city in the state of Minnesota to collateralize its deposits that are in excess of FDIC coverage, Federal Depository Insurance coverage, to the tune of 110% of the balance in those cash accounts. For one bank that we tested this past year, the cash balance did exceed the level of FDIC coverage as well as any sort of collateral that was assigned to the city for those excess balances. The reality to this finding relates actually to some transactions that related to debt issuance that occurred toward the end of the fiscal year. At December 31st or near the end of the year, the city was working through a refunding bond transaction in which the cash of the debt that was issued to refund the refunded debt was received by the city, but the payments to refund that debt did not occur until shortly after the end of the year, January, maybe early February. So the cash balance in that particular account that I'm referencing was significantly higher than you would anticipate on the part of staff, just because the refunding proceeds had been received and were being held temporarily until the payment of the refunding bond, thus causing the excess cash balance, thus causing the collateral fine. So what is the corrective action that you might have for this particular finding? Really, the corrective action has already happened. In February or late January, those refunding bonds were paid. Thus, the cash balance was lower than the typical, went back to normal, and the collateral coverage that the city has with the bank was adequate after that point. Moving on, my management report does also include a number of other areas of information, including responsibility for component units. The city financial report does include component units for reporting of the St. Peter Hospital, as well as the HRA of the city, the Housing and Redevelopment Authority. We don't audit those individually, but we do incorporate those into the city's financial reports and rely on other auditors to provide opinions on those items. I did note that the timing of the audit was complete as of June 30th. All of the information was submitted to the Office of the State Auditor on a timely basis, as noted earlier. And lastly, we did not have any challenges, or I should say difficulties, challenges for sure with COVID-19, but no difficulties certainly in performing the audit this year. Moving on to my presentation in terms of the second part of the audit really has two parts. The results related to compliance, which we just touched on. The second part relates to the financial results. My management report does provide a number of schedules or graphs that relate to financial results. The first one being in property taxes. We have a lot of discussion in our document related to property taxes. Property taxes really start with market values. You can see in the graphical presentation that's shown on the PowerPoint, the property tax market values have been increasing. In 2019, the property tax values increased about 7.6%, and really has been increasing ever since the downturn in the economy in 2000. Really, that was probably from 2008. Really affected the city all the way through 2013. We do provide information on tax rates in the management report. The city's average tax rates have been very flat the last few years. You can see in this graph, the city's average tax rate was pretty much 50, a rate of 50 for the last 2 years. Overall, the city's tax rate for residents as a whole, including school district and county, has been relatively flat this past several years. My report then does provide information on governmental funds as a whole. We provide information in here really to give you a sense for some trend information, comparing yourselves not only to cities statewide, but also the city of St. Peter the last few years, as well as really just some trend information. This particular graph shows the city's revenues on a per capita basis over the last 3 years, as well as comparable data statewide, at least for 2018, which is the most readily information available. You can see that in total revenues of the city in 2019 were $824 per resident. That is typically lower than the average city statewide, as the city has a significant amount of non-taxable property and relies on other funding sources, including enterprise funds, to operate the governmental areas of the city, thus typically trending below averages when it comes to governmental fund revenues. You can see that really when you look at the property tax line. Overall property tax per resident is almost half the average of a city statewide. It really relates back to that non-taxable property that's referenced. The city does receive a more intergovernmental revenue, which offsets some of that property tax impact as discussed. As you can see here, the city did receive less revenues per capita in 2019, mostly related to licenses and permits and charges for services, specifically mostly related to previous years. There was more activity happening from a development perspective in those years. We also provide information then on governmental funds expenditures. Expenditures of the city in 2019 were roughly $1,109 per resident. And we break that down into expenditures for current expenditures, capital expenditures, which tend to go up and down depending on the level of development, and then debt service is the other category. Really, you can see that overall, the city spent about $714 per resident, which is very consistent with other cities statewide in those categories. In 2019, the category that stood out is public safety. There's some funding happening there, really for the city fire hall that happened in 2019, which you can also see in the capital outlay category. Auditors also like to look at the debt service. You can see that debt service in the governmental funds per resident was $157, which is comparable to other cities in your class, about 192. So for governmental funds, the total debt service is lower than the average per resident statewide. My report also provides information then on the changes in governmental fund balance. Fund balance is the equity position of the city at the end of the year. You can see here that the general fund fund balance actually declined in 2019 by $549. Most of that was budgeted by the city for the year. It's a little higher than the budget, but pretty much close to what the budget expectations were. You can see actually on this graph, the biggest increase in fund balance was in restricted categories. Restricted categories almost increased almost 4.1 million. What that is actually is those refunding bonds that I was referencing earlier. Those refunding bonds were issued at the end of the year and increased fund balance, and next year you'll see an equal and almost exact offset to those increases as those refunding bonds get paid off. Here you can see the results in the general fund over the last 5 years. The general fund's financial position is guided by a fund balance policy. The fund balance policy of the city reflects that to maintain a range of 35 to 50% of operations. The reason for that is all cities in the state receive property tax settlements only a couple of times per year. So thus a fund balance is really helping you with your cash flow, getting you from one a month to the next, really over 6 months to fund that cash flow. At the end of 2019, the city's general fund balance was 42.3% of operations, which is pretty much dead center to the actual range of fund balance that your policy suggests. We do then provide information on general fund revenues and expenditures. General fund revenues this past year were about $200,000 more than what had been budgeted. Property tax collections were better than expected, which is one area there. This particular graph you see on the screen is really a trend line of revenues with the flattening of intergovernmental revenues, or the lack of increase in intergovernmental revenues over the last 5 years. You're seeing that property taxes is the main area of increase in the general fund in terms of revenues. We also provide information on expenditures. Expenditures were about $400,000 more than what was budgeted for the year. Almost all of that was in capital. Capital outlay was over budget by about $400,000 for the fire hall I previously mentioned, as well as the Minnesota Square Pavilion project that occurred in 2019. We also then provide information on trend lines in expenditures. You can see on the screen, really shows 5 years of results for expenditures, and they include expenditures by function. Interestingly, from a perspective on these presentations, I look at your data there and see that most of the increases were in public safety. I've noted probably in every presentation I've done over the last 2 months that trend line is consistent with every city. It was asked on many occasions, given the unrest here in the metropolitan area, what is the trend line in public safety for Minnesota cities? And you can see here, and in many categories in many cities, that is very consistent with the pattern we're seeing in terms of the costs for local government when it comes to public safety. So moving forward, we also provide information on enterprise funds. The city has significant enterprise funds. We provided data on the fund balance / net position of fund balance, as you can see on the screen. Overall, enterprise funds net position increased by about $500,000. Probably the one that stood out the most is the electric and wastewater fund that sees significant increases, while the stormwater fund had a decline in fund balance, net position in this past year. Most of the presentation we provide in the management report provides some trend line data on these operations. The electric fund you can see here, which is a significant operation, almost a $12 million operation, did show very positive results for the year. The electric fund, albeit revenues being down due to less usage, did have income above the line, which is represented by income before tranches, which is the green line. The water fund experienced similar results. Water's consumption all over the state in terms of local governments was below the previous year revenues, mainly due to the weather. Weather in 2019 was a little less hot than it has been this year, thus watering was down. That being the case, operating revenues are lower, but certainly the green line in terms of net income was above the line for the water fund. Wastewater fund is similar. The wastewater fund saw similar results this past year with decreased consumption. The last area that I wanted to talk about, which has been a topic of conversation in the city for several years, and that relates to the debt, outstanding debt per capita balances the city has. I referenced this earlier when it came to governmental funds per capita. We do provide information in our report on outstanding debt per capita and compare that to statewide data. Here it does actually show the total outstanding balances in debt by category, by first for governmental activities. See the city's debt per capita is about $1,095 per resident. I'd caution you there with some of that data in the sense that there were some refunding bonds that were still outstanding at the time. So there's some cash sitting in at year end that's going to pay down some of that debt there. But you can see overall those governmental funds, you do have less revenue per capita, or less debt per capita than comparable city. That is not the case when it comes to the enterprise funds. The outstanding debt per capita in the enterprise funds, particularly in water, are above the averages. Wastewater, certainly there was a significant amount of development that happened over the last several years that has caused that particular category to be in that case. But overall, the city has debt per capita of $3,305 when the average city has about $2,500, so slightly above the average. So lastly, my management report does provide information on other accounting and auditing updates. The Governmental Accounting Standards Board has been issuing many new guidance in a variety of different areas. And you can anticipate more changes coming from GASB that are outlined in our report. Fortunately, the GASB has allowed auditors a reprieve due to COVID-19. They've actually deferred all new auditing and accounting standards for 1 year as a result of COVID to allow auditors and accountants all over the country to catch up with all the modifications and changes that are happening in the COVID space. So in summary, my audit provided a clean opinion on the city's basic financial statements. I mentioned the emphasis of a matter regarding the fire relief GASB 68 implementation, which is certainly a positive highlight for me. I mentioned the internal control reportable item, and we did have the one legal compliance finding, which at this point, as we talked today, has been eliminated or corrective action has already been taken. And lastly, I just wanted to reflect on one of the goals of this presentation is to reflect that the city really takes this audit process as well as the internal controls of its organization very seriously. We've asked a lot of questions along the way, and we get very good answers, timely answers, and rarely do I get an answer that is, we don't know. They take their controls and their financial activities very seriously, and as a result, have very positive audit results. So that's the end of my presentation. There we go. I hope I did. Todd, maybe there we go. I knew there was a way to stop sharing.
There you go.
Technology at its best. I got it. So with that, certainly positive audit results for the year. I'll open it up to any questions that you might have for me.
Anyone have any questions for Jim or Sally? Brad?
I just wanted to say, and Steve Grams won't be surprised that I actually read the whole report. So he made a comment about that. It was very informative, and it was easy to follow the way you laid out all the debt, the way all the and all the projections. So thank you for all your work and for making it easy. It was nice to see a positive report as well. So thank you.
You.
Anyone else? Question, I guess, or a comment? Steve? Gotta turn it on, Steve.
You know, I have gone through many, many audits in the course of my career, and I would say every one of them has come up with the same recommendation about separation of duties. At what point would you finally come to the conclusion that there is sufficient separation of duties, when people are on top of each other, or what? I mean, I have not yet heard a positive result relative to that.
Yeah, that's a great question regarding separation of duties. The overriding analysis that comes with separation of duties comes down to a cost-benefit analysis. Is there a benefit? So to eliminate this particular finding, you would need to add staff. That is the bottom line when it comes to it. So by adding staff, there's a cost to eliminating the finding. So the city is making the decision to work with what I would refer to as compensating controls with the staff that they have available to them versus adding staff to have perfect segregation of duties. The question, I guess, that you could ask yourself is, how big does the city need to get to eliminate eliminate separation of duties? I mean, we've had situations, let's say, in other cities that we work with, where they got big enough or maybe increased in population such that we started to recommend, well, wow, you're getting big enough where you probably want to have more staff so that you can separate your duties. I don't see the city right in that space right now, but that would be the answer to your question, is you would need to get bigger as a city as a whole to really have a recommendation that says you need to eliminate this.
Anyone else? Questions? Carrie?
I have a follow-up question to that, and Todd, maybe you can repeat it if they can't hear me, but you said that typically cities look at that based on population. Is that typical?
The question is it typical to look at that based on population, Jim?
This is a segregation of duties, I'm assuming
Yes.
we're talking about,
Yes,
right?
that's correct.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it would be typically, maybe not so much on population, but more on type of activity. So an organization can be significantly different or more or less sophisticated based on the type of activities that you have. So for instance, in the city of St. Peter, you have an electric fund, which creates some sophistication. A city next to you might have greater population, or less population, but wouldn't have an electric fund. So I don't look at it from the standpoint of purely population. I look at it more onto, well, what level of sophistication does the city have or need, or what's happening. Does that mean, we've done an analysis in terms of this, in terms of your city compared to other cities, and we feel comfortable with the opinions that we're issuing in that space.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Yep.
Anyone else? Questions? The resolution accepting the 2019 financial statements together with the independent auditor's report appears on page 30. Is there a motion for approval?
Ed will make a motion to approve.
Noel will second.
Okay. Ed 1, Shannon 2. Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please, Barb.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Ed Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Noel.
Aye.
Councilmember Carrie Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Grahams.
Aye.
Councilmember Bruflat.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBoss.
Aye.
Resolution is approved. Thank you, Jim. Todd has one more thing, or Sally?
Just one more comment, for people watching or listening, the audit will be available at the library and on the website by the end of the week. So if people want to read the hard copy, it'll be at the library, or else we'll have it on the website electronically.
All right. Thanks again, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Next up, we have a 2020 equipment certificate proposal. Sally?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and City Council, I'm here tonight to present the results of the 2020 equipment certificate proposal. The memo is on page 31 and 32 and is in the amount of $368,250 over 5 years. The principal payment amounts would be $73,650 plus interest over 5 years is what we put out. First payment is due on August 1st, 2021, and the final payment will be August 1st, 2025. You approved the purchase of the following equipment back on December 9th of 2019, and the following purchase were to be made with the money. A squad car for the police, and then handheld radios for the police. Streets purchased a road grader, and the pool, we purchased a heater for the main part of the pool. Last year, you'll remember, we purchased for the pit. This year, we upgraded the heater for the main part of the pool. We sent out 6 bid proposals and posted on our website. CCF Bank of St. Peter, Bremer, and Wells Fargo did not send in proposals. Pioneer Bank, Hometown Bank, and First National Bank did send in proposals, which is on page 32. And Pioneer Bank was the low bidder for this at 1.5% interest each of the 5 years. So the total cost of this bond will be $3,084,821.25. Interest of that is $16,571.25 over the 5 years. First National was the next low bidder, and then Hometown Bank. I am asking you to approve the resolution on page 33 in the packet, ending on page 38. There is one change on page 34 in paragraph 2.02. The principal amount should be $368,250, not the 457.
Once again.
368,250, not 457.
It's mentioned in the resolution a number of times, we just missed that one.
Missed that one as we were changing everything out, sorry. So I'm asking for approval. Questions?
Questions for Sally? Brad?
I just a clarification since I wasn't at the December meeting. Just what's the background as far as, or what's the threshold we look at for doing an equipment certificate? For example, I can see the road grader and the police car, but like the pool heater for $20,000. Is there a threshold as to why we decide to not dip into reserves for something like that? I'm just asking for clarification. I don't have any objection.
Yeah, part of the challenge, this is something that we discuss as a part of your overall budget and budgeting process, and staff comes forward with items that we believe are appropriate for the equipment certificate. There are a couple criteria involved in that, not the biggest of which is the amount of money to be spent. That is not the biggest issue. Really, we look at, is it a capital expenditure that has a greater than 5-year to 7-year life, so that the debt matches the life expectancy of it. And frankly, then it becomes a balancing act that the staff and the council go through relative to its impact either on your reserves, as you mentioned, or on an impact on your tax levy. We have typically done equipment certificates every year for the past, probably frankly, about 30 years. They've ranged from a low of around $200,000 to a high of, in total, probably somewhere in excess of $800,000 in years where we've had items such as you see here, but then in addition, we've had a couple of years where we've purchased a piece of fire equipment using this. So those two things together would have made it over $800,000 or $900,000. One of the challenges is that if you do not approve this, as an example, then you'll be short of cash reserve because we planned for this expenditure. About 15 years ago or so, we changed the process for this, and we issued the debt prior to purchasing the equipment. And while that's very safe to do, from a staff perspective, that's very safe. It costs you a lot more money because you have 6 to 8 months of interest before you're even using that cash. And so typically what we do here is we try and do the expenditures. Your finance director manages the cash appropriately. And when cash is needed to ensure that you are in the appropriate financial position, then we go to issue the debt and come to you with that process.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Anyone else have any questions? The resolution accepting proposal for sale of $368,250 of general obligation equipment certificates for indebtedness of 2020 appears on pages 33 through 38 with the one change on page 34, which corresponds to what I just read about the dollar amount. On 2.02, it should say $368,250 instead of the $457,000. With that change, is there a motion for approval?
Mr. Mayor, this is Steve Grams. I'll make that motion, please.
Carrie Johnson will second.
Steve 1, Carrie 2. Any other questions or comments now? Call the roll, please, Barb.
Councilmember Ed Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Noel.
Aye.
Councilmember Carrie Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Grams.
Aye.
Councilmember Bruflat.
Aye.
Councilmember DeVos.
Aye.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye. Resolution is approved. Next up, we have the COVID-19 microloan repayment for the team. And Russ.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mayor Zeman, members of the City Council, it's with heavy heart that I bring this item to you for your consideration. I've received correspondence from Jay Deutscher of For the Team. indicating that due to the COVID situation, he is being forced to close his St. Peter operations. He did receive a $10,000 COVID-19 microloan in early April. His correspondence indicates he took that in good faith. He does recognize his obligation to the city and that you have the option of immediately calling the note and making it due and payable. He is respectfully asked that you forego that action and that you allow him to immediately begin making monthly payments of $100. The promissory note did certainly obligate him at your insistence to pay it in lump sum. It did obligate him then to begin making payments of $100 a month next June, or June 2021. He would like to begin making payments of $100 a month beginning in August, and he is confident that his remaining business interests in Fairmont would be able to provide sufficient cash flow. Again, it's regrettable that it's come to this situation, but I think you all recognize the severity, the uncertainty, and in some instances, the devastation of the business environment. So, Mr. Mayor, I'll be quiet at this point and answer any questions you or members of the council will have, but there is a resolution that has been prepared on page 40 that would contemplate allowing payments of $100 a month beginning in August.
Mr. Mayor, I'd also point out that this was reviewed by the Economic Development Authority, and Russ, it's accurate to say that they have recommended council approval?
Yes, I should have noted that. Thank you. Yes, the EDA did consider this at their last meeting, and they have recommended that you consent to the repayment of $100 a month beginning in August.
Okay. Questions? Carrie.
My question is, Russ, at a certain point, and hopefully this doesn't happen, this isn't a reoccurring circumstance, this is obviously very sad for this business and to lose the business in St. Peter, but at a certain point, does the EDA consider revising the policy as we potentially will take action in this way for this business? Will the EDA consider revising the policy, or is this a case-by-case basis situation?
For those that are remote, the question, or it was expressed by Councilmember Carrie Johnson, that it's sad that this business is closing within St. Peter for the business and for the community. Does this then look at the EDA to modify their policies relative to these loans?
If you want a blanket policy, that certainly would be within your right. You know, perhaps I do not perhaps think this is going to be the only business that unfortunately is not going to survive the financial situation. This is only the first, perhaps. If you want a blanket policy that would allow them to begin making monthly payments immediately, that certainly would be something the council could ask the EDA to consider and then make a recommendation back to you.
Yeah, I think that would be something to consider. I can't imagine with these circumstances having a business close and then have to repay the full loan amount the way that the policy is written currently.
Councilmember Johnson's point is that it would be a challenge to see other businesses who might have the same struggles go through the process in this way, and that a blanket policy may be advisable.
Okay, I can ask the EDA to consider that matter at their next monthly meeting here in July.
Thank you.
Steve?
For those council members that were at the EDA meeting where this was discussed, could you give me or members of the rest of the council members that weren't there kind of a synopsis of your discussion relative to this?
Russ, you want to just take that?
Well, Councilman DeVos?
Go ahead, Brad.
A member of the EDA.
Go ahead, Brad.
Or if Ed, does Ed want to take it? Doesn't matter to me.
Nope, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think the thinking here was, well, number one, this individual actually approached us with a plan. And the other issue is, you know, it's a matter of, yes, we could request it, but he does have a business interest in another community. So that was one of the things that came up was, no, the asking for repayment of this 10,000 right now might actually jeopardize the business, because he is actually still also going to be operating, selling stuff in St. Peter, just he won't have a business here. So actually requesting the 10,000 now might actually jeopardize the ongoing business, even if he was able to come up with it. And really the idea of, it's the idea of working with people during this crisis versus kicking them when they're down. And biggest factor, I think, at least for me playing into it, was the fact that he actually approached the EDA with it. He actually approached the EDA with the solution versus just trying to get out from under it. So, or waiting for us to come with the solution.
So Brad, was the vote unanimous?
Yes, it was.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Brad.
Anyone else? Questions?
Mr. Mayor, if I could, I'd just add that there is a precedent that had been established in 2009 as we did the Highway 169 project. Total Entertainment was forced to close ultimately, and at that point, the city did accept continued monthly payments from the owner, and it was ultimately repaid in full after a number of years.
But we also had cases that it was not.
We also had cases where they did not make repayment. Is that correct, Russ? We had one, I believe.
There was one case with the former PJ's Pizza.
And we've had cases more recent than that, where everybody has a lot of good intentions. If things get back, who knows when, back to some kind of normalcy, I can't remember what we've done in the past, but do we pursue this if he has not? Hopefully he will, but if he has not made payments, and if he doesn't, and things are back, business on a relative basis is back to normal, what do we do then? And he has not made payments for a while.
The mayor's,
Do you want me to answer that one?
yeah, if you would, that would be great, and I can chime in.
Yeah, in the PJ's Pizza incident, we did ultimately obtain a judgment. In my opinion, it's essentially worthless. There were tens of thousands of dollars of debt to other state agencies that would have taken precedence. So I do believe that money is ultimately not ever going to be collected. But if we were to set him up $100 a month and then payments would lapse, then I would suggest it would be ultimately appropriate to then pursue alternative means of collection. Mr. Deutscher has indicated if he had the $10,000, he would gladly repay it tomorrow. But he had asked to have this remedy rather than perhaps more adverse remedies that would be available to him.
No, I understand that. I'm just looking down the road, that we say, yeah, this is great now in this situation, but things changed. And we just need to be cognizant that, that's happening. And, we've had them throughout the years where people have gone through this similar type of thing with the EDA. We have to remember this is still, in a roundabout way, taxpayer money, and I agree. At this point in time, yeah, there's no problem with doing this. Just so we know down the road that things may not work out as well as we plan.
So,
go ahead, Todd.
If I may, the process for that in the past has been a review by the EDA making a recommendation to the city council to pursue other means for additional collection if the payee is not able to meet their obligation.
Right, correct. But like I say, I just want to make sure that we don't forget about this down the road.
Yeah.
I mean, this runs out. This takes over 8 years to pay back. A lot can change in 8 years.
Yeah, a lot can change in 8 years.
Any other questions or comments? The resolution establishing a plan for repayment of COVID-19 microloan made to Jay Deutscher, doing business as For the Team, appears on page 40. Is there a motion for approval?
Ed will make a motion.
Boswell moved.
I heard Ed one and Emily. Was that you? There was
Whoever.
Well, both of us did.
okay.
It doesn't matter.
Ed 1, Emily 2 is what I heard.
It was a tie.
Any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please, Barb.
Councilmember Noel,
Aye.
Councilmember Carrie Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Grahams,
Aye.
Councilmember Bruflat,
Aye.
Councilmember DeVos,
Aye.
Mayor Zeman,
Aye.
Councilmember Ed Johnson.
Aye.
Resolution is approved. Thank you, Russ. Next up, we have a business reopening promotion plan. And Todd, if you want to start this off before we get to our guest speaker for the evening?
Mayor and members, if I can, I'll turn this over to Russ. Russ and Ed have worked cooperatively on this plan, which is similar to what we used during the 2009 Highway 169 project. Russ will give a little bit of an update or an outline of the two discussions that the Economic Development Authority had, and then if we can at that point, leave room for Ed to provide any commentary.
All right. Before you start, Russ, Ed, if you want to give us...
Mayor, members of the city council.
No, Ed, Russ,
hold on a second.
Russ, hold on a second. Ed, so I don't forget later, Ed, you want to give us your name and your home address, please?
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Well, we're going to ask Ed for his name and his home address, as we would typically ask for anybody that addresses the council.
Okay, my name is Ed Lee, and my title is Director of the St. Peter Area Chamber of Commerce. And my home address is 802 West Park Row.
Thank you, Ed.
Thanks, Ed.
Go ahead, Russ.
Sorry about that, Mr. Mayor.
You're killing me.
Again, I don't have to remind you of the situation that's in front of us, but the businesses have slowly started to reopen. Many of them have slowly started to reopen, and things are certainly challenging and remain challenging and probably will for some time. Through the Chamber of Commerce, a request has been made to the EDA and ultimately to yourselves to provide a $10,000 marketing fund so the Chamber can help market that St. Peter businesses are open. They're have adopted the best practices. They're trying to operate in a safe, sanitary, in a manner that protects both the patrons as well as the employees. We originally approached the EDA in May, and the EDA at that point asked that Ed put together a little more defined outline of what he would intend to do with the funds, the outlets, various outlets that he would intend to market upon or within. And then Ed had done a pretty good job of putting that together. It's included in your packet that you hope you had time to review. And we went back to the EDA in June, and the EDA at that point had recommended to the city council then that you do adopt a $10,000 marketing fund to be administered by the Chamber of Commerce to assist in the marketing of the business community as we slowly reopen and reestablish themselves after the COVID-19. Again, the EDA has considered the matter and they have made a recommendation that the city council provide the $10,000. The city administrator mentioned similar efforts that were done in 2009. That was actually a fund that put together a promotional package where there was a customer loyalty card and you had to get it stamped or endorsed by a certain number of businesses. And it was determined really early on that that is not the proper method to market the community now. Let's ease back into this. Let's give some people hopefully some comfort that the businesses are practicing safety and sanitation and that they have the safety of their customers and their employees top of mind at all times. I've been around the last couple of weeks and yeah, things are slowly beginning to reestablish themselves somewhat. Mr. Mayor, I'd answer any questions that you or the council would have. Otherwise, I know that Mr. Lee would like to have a couple comments.
Mr. Lee, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ed.
Oh, thank you, Honorable Mayor, honorable members of the City Council. Thanks for the chance to say a few words and really formally support the business community here. You're all familiar with the request Thanks to Russ really for helping us navigate this process. I think it's been a very good process for the EDA to kind of send it back and say we want more specifics, to sort of vet it. The situation changes daily, hourly. You've all seen it. We've had some letters of support. We've had the EDA support it, River Rock Coffee, Sweet Alice Floral and Gifts, Arrow Hardware, all sent letters to support the campaign. Really, and I should have started with this, the top priority is safety. The business leaders are working hard with distancing and foot traffic patterns and hyper sanitizing to make their venues as safe as practical and as safe as possible. Business leaders are looking out for their customers, looking out for themselves and their families. They're looking out for their employees, really. So with our proposal for this campaign, we're working with the experts from Greater Mankato Growth and their Cato Comeback campaign, kind of watching what they're doing, adapting the campaign with traditional media, social media, really sending that message that business leaders and employees are concerned about consumer safety. It's all about consumer confidence. This is an important point. Businesses downtown all over St. Peter are seeing customers. Customers are going in, but they could accommodate more customers. And this campaign will in no way overwhelm them with too many customers. We know people are prudently skittish out there. They're afraid of COVID-19. And thank goodness they are. Thank goodness the curve is being flattened. Many consumers are comfortable enough going into grocery stores, big box stores, great big yellow candy barns even. We want them to feel that same level of comfort and probably greater comfort in the St. Peter stores, the boutiques, the restaurants, coffee shops. The goal is really to balance the need to stop the spread with the very real need to fuel the economy. The local economy is the lifeblood of this community. Even the governor, top health officials say fueling the economy is vital. So they talk about that balance. Very, very important balance. The promotion campaign will do that locally. And I'd be happy to hear any thoughts and happy to try to field any questions that you might have. And want to say thanks to everybody for the opportunity.
Anyone have questions for Ed or Russ?
Emily has her hand up. It's hard to see, she's off camera.
Oh, Emily?
Sorry. Hi, thank you. Thank you, Russ and Ed, for your presentation. And my sympathy is certainly with the business community at this time for the struggle that this is and the ongoing crisis that we're in. My question is kind of based on a vote that took place in Mankato last week about mandatory masks in all public places. And I personally have a lot more comfort going to Mankato to shop right now if I need groceries because mandatory masks. I think that that is a really wise decision on their part. And so what are these businesses doing as far as masks? And is that something that the business community has considered here in St. Peter? And can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I certainly hope everyone's had a chance to get into the businesses, the restaurants, even the bars, and see what's happening with the sanitizing and the distancing and the wearing of masks. I personally wear a mask. I have not touched a gas pump or a door handle on any business with a naked hand in the past 4 months. I favor bread bags that fall gracefully into garbage cans when I'm out of businesses and done with gas pumps. I think everybody would cooperate with a mask ordinance. If the city council were to pass a mask ordinance, like the city council in Mankato did, there are extreme thoughts on both ends of the spectrum. Some people, for whatever reason, and they are happy to outline their reasons for not wanting to wear a mask. And there are people who are very, very adamant about wearing masks. I think there's a lot of people in the middle, and I wouldn't have the expertise to assign a percentage, but maybe throwing out a guess, 40, 50%, say, hey, I'll cooperate with whatever the rule is. We've just seen the businesses in St. Peter really take precautions and really do things to keep their customers as safe as possible. Requiring masks, I don't feel like that's the responsibility of the business. If the governor issues that decree, then great. If the city council issues that rule, definitely. But yeah, businesses are definitely working very hard with their protocols to keep everybody safe as possible and practical.
Yeah, just to follow up, I have witnessed both ends in St. Peter. I've gone to a business that uses really great practices and has a carry-out option, and all the one employee working at a time is wearing a mask. And then I've been to another business in town where there were 3 employees, none of whom were wearing masks. And it was a smaller place, and so it was kind of surprising. I was like, oh, I'm not comfortable here. Just my own comfort level. But I think that, as I have polled, I've talked to a lot of people in St. Peter about this, and I'm not saying that it has to be on the business end, not at all. But I have heard a lot of support for such a thing. I know for me personally, it would make me more comfortable to be out in St. Peter. To see those masks is a sign of, it gives me more confidence. And so that is my thought, and I'll leave it at that. And that was my only question. Thank you.
Ed, I have a question for you. Does the state level of the Chamber of Commerce or the national level, do you have access to, or do they provide any funds for things like this?
Members and those virtually, the mayor's question was whether the state Chamber of Commerce or at the national level Chamber of Commerce provide any dollars that could be used in a similar fashion.
Not that I'm aware of. Chambers, because we're 501c6s, which makes us nonprofits, but a very special category of nonprofits, has no access to any help, whether it's PPP or EIDL or anything. So there just is not a lot of money out there for Chambers of Commerce to run these sorts of programs. The resources just that I'm aware of are not available.
Todd, what about the CARES Act and those other types of things where we have access to the funds? Does this fit into any of that?
So the mayor's question is related to the Federal CARES Act and whether funding of this type might fall into those categories that could be reimbursed or those funds be utilized. Let me jump on that one. I don't know that Ed would know the answer to that. Frankly, I don't know the answer to that. That is something, if you do move forward, that we will put to kind of our brainstorming and questioning list. Has additional regulations and guidance come out relative to use of those dollars?
I could see, maybe people can't hear me, but I could see us doing this, tonight, but then put it on a reimbursement request, through the CARES Act or something like that, if it fits.
The mayor's point is that if that was done this evening, it should be on a reimbursement list if it's eligible to be reimbursed through that program, through the CARES Act. Did I catch that okay,
Yep.
Mr. Mayor?
You got it.
Yeah, and I think certainly we would add this to that list. Again, I think additional regulations, additional guidance continues to come out. And so I don't know precisely whether it would fit on that list, but we'll be learning a lot more over the next week or 3 here as it moves forward.
Okay. Any other questions? Chuck. Ed?
Ed, I see there's a first wave and a second wave. How much
time or space is it going to be in between the two?
Ed, the question from Councilmember Ed Johnson is, it appears that there are 2 waves of promotion or advertising. How much time is between the waves, do you think?
We want to be very adaptable and not a lot of time between the waves. We want to go in with the first wave and, assess and see what the experience is instead of investing everything all at once. Because it's a dynamic, fluid situation, let's go in with half of the resources first. And then if it works perfectly with the first wave, then go in with that second wave. And very little time between the 2 waves. Because with marketing, we hear that you want to keep that punch strong. You want to keep it going. You want to keep that message loud and clear and proud and out there.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
This is for Russ and Ed, I guess. What's the accounting process for the payment and issuance of these funds, and how long of a time frame are we looking? Well, I guess you've got that in here, but what happens to excess funds if there is such a thing?
The mayor's question is how does the accounting work for this, and what happens with funds that might not be expended?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, as the city administrator and I had discussed that our intent was to write a check for $10,000 to the chamber, which then they would account for in the same manner they do with the tourism and visitor funding, ultimately ending with a report back to the city council.
All right. Any other questions? Steve?
First of all, Ed, I don't feel that I'm very honorable. Maybe our mayor is, but I'm the least honorable person on this council. I think Brad DeVos is up there pretty high. The other thing I wanted to say is from my personal point of view, I truly appreciate what you have done for our business community and the city. You don't ever seem to wane at all, and you're positive. I appreciate that, and I really enjoy your articles in the paper. So I do feel very positive about what you do and how you represent our business community. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Shannon.
I just want to piggyback on and agree with Steve's remarks, and so I will second those. And I was really pleased to read the plan, and I'm very happy to support it and our St. Peter businesses.
Anyone else? Carrie.
Ed, I just want to say I appreciate the diversity of marketing. So you've got radio, you've got print advertisement, you've got social media. I think that's a great way to hit all types of consumers. I think the challenge is going to be is now that Mankato has passed this ordinance, what is the comfort level of folks shopping, in St. Peter when they don't, most businesses don't have a mask requirement or even an encouragement. And so I see that as a challenge, and perhaps the governor is going to pass something hopefully soon. So I would like it if he did, then we wouldn't maybe have to take it up here. But I see that as a challenge, and I just wanted to point that out, especially as we're trying to increase capacity where we can have capacity at these businesses. There's a strong business case to mask up in St. Peter.
Members, Councilmember Johnson was expressing her gratitude for the diversity of utilization of the funds across a number of media platforms, and questioning whether we remain at a disadvantage relative to Mankato because Mankato has a mandatory mask requirement where St. Peter does not, and some businesses ask for masks or encourage that, but there are no requirements that she's aware of from businesses. Is that a concern, Ed or Russ?
It's going to be a mixed bag. I mean, right now, it has been left up to the businesses whether they want to require masks or not. I know there are a number, as Councilwoman Bruflat mentioned, that either are or aren't, and I think that ultimately the customer is going to vote. And as Councilwoman Bruflat, she doesn't feel comfortable, she's not going to patronize that business. That is going to be the measuring stick. When the restaurants reopen, my conversation was them is you're always judged by your cleanliness. Now it's going to be hyper judging. And personally, I haven't been in a restaurant yet. I don't feel comfortable as an individual, and that's my choice. I understand that. But I do know that there are a number of St. Peter businesses that are taking this responsibility to open very, very seriously. I will also note that there have been those in Mankato that says, I am not going to shop in Mankato, I'm going out of town because of the mask. So as Ed had mentioned, there is a mixed bag of opinions within the client base too. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I realize that this is a contentious issue and the M word is almost like a swear word now, but businesses are already hurting, and if they have to close, my daycare is closed tomorrow for this issue. So if businesses have to close, it hurts even more. They've already suffered enough. And so, again, I just say I hope the governor does something. It's really hard to put this on businesses. If the governor doesn't, I hope that we can talk about this as a council.
Councilmember Johnson, I think, made 3 points in that. First of all, her hope that the governor would do something relative to mandatory mask. Second of all, that it's very, very difficult for businesses to be required to make this decision on their own. And I think the third point related to just the challenges in the politicalization of using masks or not. I think the comment that she made related to mask is like a four-letter word now. And so it's very challenging for businesses and for others to sort through that.
All right. Shannon?
Well, I just have a couple points to make, which is I would also favor requiring masks. I do agree that it's a difficult choice for businesses to make on their own without some support. We're kind of in a situation right now where an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. It's kind of, if I feel like masks are just that small step, really easy, and if people do it, just consistently, that we can avoid a lot of, we can shorten this time frame when we're living through this pandemic situation significantly by something so small. I guess that's the only thing I wanted to say. I think everybody else has very eloquently summarized my feeling.
All right.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, I might recommend to the council that you do have an issue before you. And if you do want to talk about masks, maybe at the end of the building or at the end of the meeting when you kind of go round robin, and you can give staff direction at that point.
Exactly.
Yes, but I think this relates because we're spending a lot of money. And Mankato had put an ordinance in place, and we're trying to draw people to St. Peter. Mm-hmm. I hear every day I would feel more comfortable if businesses had required customers wear a mask, and that's really hard to put on businesses. So yeah. I thank you, I get the point, but yeah. I think it relates to what we're talking about too.
Yep.
The resolution establishing $10,000 for the St. Peter Business Reopening Promotion Fund appears on page 45. Is there a motion for approval?
Noel will move.
Steve Graham, second, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Shannon, 1, Steve, 2. Any other questions or comments? Brad?
Could I get a clarification? What was it that Carrie said right before we moved to the motion? That wasn't reiterated. So.
I think her point was that she understands that we should move on with the topic, but she believes that the issues are related. And we just got done talking about providing for promotion and whether it puts local businesses at a disadvantage not to have a mask requirement put in place. And she didn't say this, but I interpreted it as being either by the state or by the council. And she's going, okay, so I hit it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Call the roll, please, Barb.
Councilmember Carrie Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Grahams,
Aye.
Councilmember Bruflat,
Aye.
Councilmember DeVos,
Aye.
Mayor Zeman,
Aye.
Councilmember Ed Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Noel.
Aye.
Resolution is approved. Next up, we have a revolving loan request for Gensel Holdings LLC. Russ.
Yep, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the EDA has considered and they have recommended that you provide a $77,500 loan from the revolving loan fund to Gensel Holdings, which is Chad Gensel, who owns the Anytime Fitness franchise. Chad is being forced to relocate due to the pending sale of the space that he had been leasing in the old Ford building, I'll still call it. And Chad then has an opportunity to build a new franchise, and I'll say kitty corner or catty corner, if you will, from where he is on North 3rd Street would be the address, but it's at the corner of Dodd Avenue and Old Minnesota Avenue, or the northwest sector of that intersection. Mr. Gensel has had Volk Electric work with him to put together the project cost. He's worked with Strange Design on the design of the building. He's ultimately had to work with the Anytime Fitness corporate entity to approve his plans. And he's identified a total project cost, as you can see on page 46 in the source and use graph, of $775,000. So his request is 10% of the total project costs. The balance of the project cost would be provided by Hometown Bank, and then the SBA 504 program would join in and essentially write a check to the bank for their $310,000 portion of the project financing. But that is provided after the building is occupied. So this note is being structured somewhat alternatively, or being recommended, given that we have two primary lenders that are providing 90% of the funding, the EDA at 10%. The EDA has recommended that you accept a flat 20-year amortization of the loan. That would be necessitated by the structure of the loan required by the SBA's participation as part of the Small Business Administration. So the EDA did note that discrepancy from your policy, and typically the note then would be amortized on 20 years and then due after 5 via balloon. But truly the most common practice then had been to extend that balloon for another 5-year period as provided for in the guidelines. So rather than, call the note at the end of 5 years and go through the process of extending the balloon, in this instance, it would be structured so that at every 5 years, the note would be reviewed and the interest rate then would be adjusted up or down based on the U.S. prime advertised at that particular moment. The appraisal of the property came in at $750,000, and again, the total project cost has been identified at $775,000. The appraisal, though, is at a 56-foot wide building, and I mentioned Anytime Fitness Corporate had a review, and at their insistence, 4 feet have been added to that. So there's an extra square footage that wasn't accounted for in the appraisal. The Hometown Bank has not necessitated an update of the appraisal to reflect that additional square footage, neither has SBA. It is anticipated that if the appraisal were adjusted to account for that additional funding, the appraisal would exceed the $775,000 of the loan. The note would be structured, if you go with the EDA's recommendation, again, on a 20-year amortization. The U.S. prime rate, as advertised in Wall Street Journal, is 3.25%. The note would be collateralized by a promissory note, and then given that the note is made to Gensel Holding LLC, it would be appropriate for Chad Gensel and his spouse to personally guarantee the note then as individuals. The loan then would be subordinate to mortgages filed by the SBA Hometown Bank and then the SBA. And then if Chad were to relocate or close the operation, the note would become wholly due and payable at that point. Mr. Mayor, I would answer any questions that you or the members of the council may have.
Questions? I have a couple, Russ. On page 49.1C, do we always refer to someone on a loan or a resolution like this and his spouse? Don't we give a name?
Russ,
I don't recall what it is right now, but
Well, I mean, isn't it just legal common practice to put someone's name in there and not just his spouse or her spouse or whatever the case may be? Because that may change
that is true.
over time. So anyway, Chris, I don't know what your feelings are about that.
So the mayor's question relates to page 49, section 1C, where the note is made to Gensel Holding and shall personally be guaranteed by Chad Gensel and his spouse. The mayor's question is, do we normally list out the spouse's name? I think without further review, certainly this is something that you could table, but if you wanted to give review to the city attorney and to follow our previous practice, you could approve it based on that criteria.
Well, that's why can Chris hear us?
Yeah, that's why I was saying it over. I
Yeah.
think Chris is reading. He might not have drawn these before.
Well,
These
that-
would likely be Jim.
All right.
Chris, do you have I'm just wondering if you can hear us, Chris. Oh, he's looking.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So do you have an opinion, Chris, what would be the normal practice, or should we review previous notes?
I would suggest that we review previous notes and see how those were noted.
Yeah, I have no problem, if we approve this, that's fine, and then just make the changes, but to me, it just,
If I may, I know there are instances where we did have it listed as "and their spouse," or if there were instances where I did know the spouse's name, it did have it in there. So
Okay.
there have been resolutions that have been adopted with both instances.
maybe I'm being too anal about it. That could very well be. The other question I have, Russ, is how much money is Mr. Gensel putting into this project?
Mr. Gensel isn't having anything additional put into this. He's had some pre-development funds put into the project.
How much were those? What was the
I
dollar
don't have
amount?
them quantified. He's had some of the expenditures of acquiring the property, getting those things prepared, legal review and things like that.
The acquisition of the property is included in the project cost here.
Right.
But the design cost has been an engineering cost he's paid for up to this point. But I don't
But
know
he's
the
had some-
number.
But doesn't the
He's
EDA,
had some
don't we,
paid up front.
on the EDA, don't we require him to have a certain percentage invested in this?
The question is, under the policy of the EDA, isn't there a requirement for the borrower to have a certain percentage of funds into the project?
The guidelines would suggest that the maximum EDA would be 10, and then the borrower and the bank between them would have 60%. As a general rule, we have asked that the borrower come in with 10%.
So that's my question. Where's the 10%?
There is not a specific 10%. I guess then that would be a second variance from the guidelines as well as with the amortization.
Did the EDA express any concern about that? I was on the EDA and we brought it up, quite often.
The question is, did the EDA express any concern about that?
No, they didn't.
Okay. Any more questions? Anyone else? Steve?
I have two questions, Mr. Mayor. Is some other business taking the space that this individual is losing? You know, Russ?
Yeah, there is a proposed project. It's perhaps not my story to tell, but it would ultimately result in the demolition of the current structure on the site.
Okay. And then to echo our mayor's point, I noticed of that too, because typically any other loan that the EDA has processed, there typically has been a certain contributory amount put in by the borrower. So are we setting precedent here by doing this? Well, that's my concern also, to echo on the mayor's point.
Yeah, I can't recall an instance where we've gone to zero. Usually they put something in. I will note that Mr. Gensel's business has been significantly curtailed because of the COVID situation, and he did not seek the $10,000 0% money that would have been afforded to him. But as long as we note the variances from the guidelines, I don't think we set a specific precedent.
All right. Shannon?
Thank you. So did the EDA discuss it and dismiss it, or did it not come up in their conversations at all?
As they saw the 90% bank financing and the 10% EDA, it was not any further discussed as to Mr. Gensel's contributions.
Thank you.
Ed?
I'm on the EDA, and I did not know that 10% rule existed, or else I might have questioned it.
Did you?
Ed's point was that he did not know that there was a policy related to 10% by the borrower.
Okay. Anyone
Yep,
else?
that's been common practice.
Yeah.
I think the policy says 60% between the bank and the borrower.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Ed.
I guess that's kind of the question I was coming to. If it wasn't well known on the EDA, is this something we should send back to them for further discussion, or are we comfortable voting on it with the variant?
I guess I would like to know if he did put money up front for some of how much money he's spent so far.
Ed's point is that it would be helpful to know how much money he's spent in development costs so far.
Okay. Anyone else? Questions? I will ask. Otherwise, we can, go ahead.
I guess I just wanted to say that I agree. I don't know how significantly it delays this process, but to have perhaps the EDA revisit this 10% issue, or how much he's contributed. I also just wanted to say, to the mayor's point, I do agree that rather than that clause on 1C, we should put the spouse's name and not his spouse. So I'm hoping that that can be corrected as well.
Councilmember Kerry Johnson's point was really questioning again the 10% and under 1C that the spouse's name should be listed.
You can ask your questions first.
Russ, what is the delay if we table this?
The question from Councilmember Kerry Johnson is, Russ, what's the delay if this is tabled?
Or the impact, I should say.
Well, at least 2 weeks. The intent was to bring you the development agreement at the next meeting. There is no request for tax increment, so there wouldn't be any tax increment, but there would be a development agreement addressing the physical development of the lot, the installation of sidewalk, et cetera, things of that nature.
Okay.
All right. Shannon?
Would there be any obstacles to bringing both this and that to the next meeting?
I'm not aware if, a 2-week delay would be problematic to the bank or to Mr. Gensel and their process.
Russ, what's the cycle for the EDA to meet? Would this fall in their regular cycle, or would they need a special meeting to review?
I believe they're scheduled to meet the 23rd, the 4th Thursday, whatever that would be.
Okay.
I know a few years ago, we had a property on Minnesota Avenue that it was the same situation, a lot less money than this, less than $100,000. But it requested the 10%, but the paperwork had the wrong amount on that the building was bought for. And then the owner provided what their 10% was. I'm talking specifically about the Tanis building that they purchased. As soon as we had that, or the information, Paul was there, he had the information, and yeah, that's okay. But we have nothing here. Once again, I go back to, this is still, in some way, tax dollars or citizens' money that's going out into all of this, and I think we need to be more prudent in what we're looking at. So,
May I
Anyway.
make a motion? So this is Carrie Johnson. I'd like to propose, I'd like to make a motion to table this resolution until the EDA has had a chance to review it on July 23rd.
did everyone hear that? Todd, you want to repeat that?
Councilmember Johnson's motion was to table until July 23rd to provide opportunity for the EDA to review this.
Table till July 20, when does,
I mean, it would be the 27th, I'm sorry, Mr.
yeah,
Mayor.
the 23rd is when the
EDA meets on the 23rd.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have we have a motion to table? Is there a second?
Mr. Mayor, this is Steve Graham. I'll second Ms. Johnson's amended tabling of the resolution.
Okay, so we have a motion to table by Carrie and Steve with a second. Any more discussion on this at this point? Or questions, as long as we got Russ here and,
Mr. Mayor.
yeah, Ed.
Just one thing, Russ, if this gets tabled, which I'm pretty sure it's gonna be, make sure you bring them figures that he's already invested into the design and so forth to the EDA meeting, so we know them.
Councilmember Ed Johnson's point is that if this is tabled and a review is done by the EDA, it would be helpful to have the additional funding that he has spent or any funding that he's spent in pre-development to know how it relates to the overall project costs.
Okay. This is just a voice vote, isn't it, for table?
Normally, this would be a voice vote, but since you're in this setting,
Okay.
we're required to have a roll call vote.
Okay. All right. Brad?
I have a question. Looking at, besides what the planning and design costs he's invested, would the EDA have a stake in like furniture, fixture, equipment? So, and he's already got all of that exercise equipment. Is that something that would be brought into the fold here as far as something that would be a collateral?
No, usually the exercise equipment is put on a lease, and then they can get it replaced on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, we have a motion and second to table this. Barb, call the roll, please.
Councilmember Grahams.
Aye.
Councilmember Bruflat.
Aye.
Councilmember DeVos.
Aye.
Mayor Zeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Ed Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Noel.
Aye.
Councilmember Carrie Johnson.
Aye.
Motion is approved, and this will be tabled till till after the EDA looks at it again. All right, next up, we have a sale of Traverse Green Outlet D. And Russ again?
This
Todd?
would be one for Russ. Russell lead, and I'll chime in a little bit as we move forward.
All right.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, as the council discussed at the last workshop session, you've been approached by Community Asset Development Group, or I might refer to them as CADG as we go on, who are seeking an option to develop some residential property. Originally, they'd been looking at an alternative site for multifamily development, but as they went through their pre-development exploration, they determined that the cost to develop that particular property would not provide for a cost-effective project. So they had sought additional land that may be available for multifamily. And as part of their discussions with the city, one of the sites that they had identified then was Outlot B, which is within Traverse Green. It's the northernmost part of the property within the subdivision, and you can see that on page 71. It would lie north of an extended Clark Street that would extend from Nicollet Avenue to the west within the Traverse Green subdivision. Ultimately then, Clark Street would extend from the standard Lubber subdivision, where it dead ends at Warren Park, across Larry and Bonnie N's property, across the Ben Pell property, and Clark Street then would connect to Nicollet Avenue on the east side of the Nicollet Avenue right away. The option presented and prepared by the city administrator would be for a 12.8 acre parcel. And I could ask the administrator to go to the next map or this diagram. From what we discussed then, it's now proposed that it be a 12.8 acre parcel. As you can see on my sketch there, it shows where Clark Street would traverse east and west, and then it would show what would be expected to be in the north-south extension of Cullen Street, which is platted in the first 3 phases of Traverse Green. If you sold 8.5 east of Cullen, it was felt that there would be an unattractive, perhaps undevelopable part of land. And so as we discussed the matter with Dave Pokorny, the front person of CADG, they had consented to increasing the size of that. As you'll recall, they originally were looking at perhaps 66 units on 8.5 acres, and it would be expected that they would proportionately increase the number of units at that time also. They propose a price of $10,000 an acre, and the city had previously sought requests for proposals for the development of this property. Perhaps given anecdotal discussion around town, that it might have been attractive for the higher end or single family use. We issued 2 RFPs, or requests for proposals, and we did not receive a individual response from any of the developers or realtors within the area. So the 10,000 is within what we had contemplated to be an acceptable price as we considered what we expected to be some requests for proposal. That would make the total cost of the property at $128,000. The agreement then would obligate CADG to place $5,000 into an escrow account, and that would provide them with site control as they undertake their pre-development exploration of the environmental, wetland delineation, geotechnical, or geothermal, if you will. And then if by September 15th, they determine the property is not developable, they could withdraw from the agreement, and $5,000 would be reimbursed to them or repaid to them. If they were to withdraw post September 15th, the city would not be obligated to provide any reimbursement of the escrow dollars. The developer has asked and expects that they would be provided access to tax increment financing, which is a very common development tool that cities use to promote housing, multifamily housing specifically. And if the developer were to accept tax increment financing, they would obligate themselves then to rent 20% of the units to families with household incomes of 50% of the median household income is adjusted for family size. An example of that qualifying income then for our MSA, or Metropolitan Statistical Area, for a family of 2 would be $33,900, and for a family of 4, $42,350. The developer would be obligated, to provide annual reports to my office. I review those, and then I report to the finance department that they've been appropriately provided and that TIF payments could be distributed to them. The development of that site would require the extension of the sanitary sewer main that currently dead ends at Warren Park in the standard lumber subdivision. Again, that would cross the Larry and Bonnie N's property, which is currently farmed, as well as the Ben Pell land abutting Nicollet Avenue. To begin the process, it's requested that we have Bolton and Mank prepare what's called a right-of-way plat. We have done this in a number of instances. One, when we changed the alignment of Washington Avenue on the southern entrance to the Regional Treatment Center. We did one when we planned the roundabout at the entrance to the school and the improvements to what was then known as Gardner Road. We did one at the intersection of Old Minnesota and St. Julian in anticipation of a future roundabout by McDonald's and Speedway. Adopting the plat does not provide for the transfer of any properties. It only provides notice of the city's intent and begins a process where we identify properties that the city would intend to need to acquire at some point in the future when Clark Street would be extended. Upon the filing of the plat, then we would anticipate the negotiation of an easement to extend that sanitary sewer across the lands. And in the absence of a negotiated agreement, the city then would have some alternative means that perhaps are a little more adverse, which would include up to eminent domain. CADG has consented to the purchase agreement as drafted by your city attorney. And so as such, as per city policy, we make sure they approve so we don't make change or adopt them with the council and then they come back with changes. So they have approved the terms as they're before you today. If you do recommend changes and adopt changes, we'd have to make sure that those would be acceptable then to CADG. If you were to proceed, the property would ultimately need to be platted. Right now it's outlot, so it's not developable, so they'd have to provide a preliminary and a final plat to identify the parcel that they would obtain. We'd need to negotiate and execute the tax increment financing and development agreement, and then we'd have to negotiate the acquisition of the sanitary sewer easements. Mr. Mayor, I'd answer any questions that you would have. Perhaps the city administrator or Public Works Director Moulton is still with us. They could answer questions perhaps about the utility extensions.
All right, questions?
Mr. Mayor, if I could jump in.
You got it.
I think two important points, as Russ illustrated, is this would be, if you did take action to enter this agreement, there's one other item that you have a considerable amount of control over. The purchase agreement allows you a review of the aesthetic of the outside of the building. It doesn't allow you to say, well, we'd rather you have an extra 2-bedroom rather than a 3-bedroom. It doesn't do that. But you have the ability to approve construction based on diagrams and renderings that they would provide you. So that would be something that would be retained by the city council. Again, as Russ emphasized, it's important to note, and Pete will probably mention this as well, that this parcel is not serviced by sewer and would not be serviced unless a right-of-way and an easement for sewer connection from Grace Street on the east to this location is provided for. And so there's a process for that. And so you have the ability to do that. Property owners couldn't stop you from that, but it's important to know that there's a process associated with that you'd have to go through to acquire the right to be able to put the sewer into that private property.
Questions?
Thank you, Todd. As to the design, the council has exercised that design review for Central Square, for Park Row Crossing, for the Solace project, I believe even for the Nicollet Meadows townhouses. So it's very standard, and I appreciate him mentioning that, but that's very standard when the city is selling city-owned property. So,
Russ, the question I have, this company, I know when we did Park Row Crossing, they were very good at, Southwest Minnesota Housing was very good at getting us drawings and renditions of the exterior and interior also. Do you have any experience with this company? Are they capable, or I'm assuming they are, but are they capable of providing us with some pretty detailed things?
Yeah, yes. When they were looking at the other site, the alternative multifamily site, they were to the point where they had drawing, site plan, elevations, all of that prepared, and they need to submit that so we can identify what costs they may have that would be eligible for tax increment. And then, as you're aware, Mayor, we gave a copy of the preliminary plans to the Nicollet County Assessor's Office, and the assessor then was able to prepare a mythical or perhaps a pending or a thoughtful appraised value of the of the property for taxation. So then we turn that over to our friend Shannon Sweeney at David Brown. He'll do the tax increment calculations as to what's available. That's really what starts the negotiations. So Shannon has worked with this particular developer in the past, and he has a comfort, which gives me some comfort. And then Mr. Corney, the advanced man, is the former retired city administrator of Chaska. He's very familiar with municipal practices and such. So I have no reservation, Mr. Mayor, that they'll be able to provide what you'd need.
Can you get us, or myself, a list of maybe some properties that they've done in the area within an hour or so? I mean, are you aware of any complexes similar to this or anything like this that they've done in the area?
Well, I keep getting my developers confused. I believe they've done a Faribault project. I mean, I can get more of that.
Yeah, if no hurry on it, but I'd be interested to see, if I'm in the area, I'll drive by and take a look at them. That made a difference on one other project that we did not end up doing here a couple of years ago. So I would just be interested in that.
Can I chime in real quick on that?
Could you hear that, Russ?
Yeah, I'm sure I can get that.
The mayor's goal would be is this group has done other projects within an hour or so, if we could provide a list so that as people have an opportunity maybe to be in that community, they could, the mayor or the council members could take a look at it.
Yep. Carrie?
Oh, I was just gonna add that there's a recent Worthington article where they did a senior living facility, and they had the design of that facility within that article. So that would be one to look at that's recent in Worthington.
Councilmember Carrie Johnson is mentioning that she read an article that relates to a project that this group worked on in Worthington, and the article contained imagery of the project.
Right.
Okay. Anyone else? Questions? Brad?
I just have a question. Well, it was related. It was one of the first times this was brought up. The concern about whether we might be clustering apartments too close together. That there was a concern that the property in between might not sell. Is that still a concern that perhaps this, along with the other apartment that's on Nicollet Meadow? I know the idea was to spread the apartments out to make them more integrated into the community. What are your thoughts on that, either Todd or Russ, as far as whether we might be clustering too close together?
I don't believe that in this instance we are clustering too close together. I think that as the council has review of this and there is preliminary and final plating and design gets done, we'll have a much better view of what that is. I would tell you that I think there are some great guidelines to follow, but some of it is a little bit subjective, frankly. We do believe that there is a need for this type of housing within our community that meets both market rate rent and rent that's assisted rent. As Russ talked about, 20% of the units of tax increment financing was used. So right now, from a staff perspective, we feel comfortable with this. If at some point we become uncomfortable, we will be sure to let the council know that.
Thank you.
Emily, I saw your hand up, and Steve too. Emily first.
Emily first. Both Steve and Emily had their hands up. Emily, if you would go.
Sure. Thank you. Just to make sure that I understand, I'm just trying to clarify first. The part of the project that would require the sewers, the extension from Grace Street, that's the part that there's another process for. Is that what you were saying, Todd?
Yeah, just as a point of clarification, it would be on Clark Street. And so let me show the imagery here. And so hopefully you can all see on your screen the map. This is the eastern terminus of Clark Street. And if you drive out on Nicollet Avenue or County Road 20, if you can follow my cursor kind of along here, you will see that there is a curb cut in place already at this location, a predetermined right-of-way location or platted entry onto the county/city road. So that's the location, if that addresses your question, Emily. And that would be
Yes, and then,
there would be a second process for that. Actually, frankly, there's multiple processes related to platting and then acquisition of an easement. So I would argue there are 2 additional processes necessary. Pete would argue there's a third, which would be design and bidding of the sewer. I think he might also tell you that, at least today, as we view the marketplace, it's a very positive marketplace for us to do this kind of underground work, potentially later this fall. Pricing appears to be good for folks like us right now.
and just to connect to that, is that, Russ, the area you were referring to, the potential for eminent domain?
Yes.
And what would the reason be for that? We would have to acquire land to make that happen?
If we're going to put pipe underground, we need to have an easement from the property owner in the absence of owning that easement ourselves. I know the Public Works Director, Moltmann, had made some very, very preliminary inquiries with both the ends and the Pell interests. Negotiations may be challenging in this instance, but we will attempt everything we can to negotiate the acquisition of the easements, certainly within the appropriate means and parameters.
Eminent domain in this instance under the law would be triggered by city infrastructure. This is, and as you can see how Clark Street is already put in place, your comprehensive plan and your future land use plan contemplates a road at this location. So it really is a matter of timing for it being right of way rather than it is whether we can or cannot. In my mind, we would prefer to be able to negotiate an easement at this point, but if there is not an ability to do that, you do have the ability under the law very clearly to use eminent domain to acquire the right-of-way or an easement for placement of that public infrastructure.
Okay, I think that answers my question. Thank you.
Steve?
It's helpful. I'm not really a fan of eminent domain, and so I just wanted to hear more of the reasoning behind it, and it's helpful to see the maps. So thank you for the information.
Go ahead, Steve.
Did you say I can talk, Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, Emily touched on some of the issues, and when I read, the first letter and I saw those 2 words, I got a little apprehensive, but I guess I need to hear from Pete. I'm confused where the infrastructure would go, and if it's getting an easement, what do we typically pay if we do? And would you just bore a hole and then eventually it's covered up and you wouldn't see anything? Or is there a contribution that the owner has to pay on an annual basis or a one-time payment? Well, I guess I'd like to hear that from Pete, from a strictly an engineering perspective.
Sure. What Todd had mentioned earlier, Stephen, was if you go from the end of Clark Street in that blue shaded area that he's showing on the screen there, we would open cut the sewer. The sanitary sewer is deep enough at Clark Street to serve that area. So what we would do is retain an engineer to design that sewer. We would bore across Nicollet Avenue when we got to that property and set the sewer up to go west of Nicollet Avenue on the new Clark Street there that would serve that area. And as Todd had mentioned, there is curb cuts there so you could see where that road would go. The Enses, of course, are interested in farming that land, and so timing would be a key issue. Get it done after crop is out this year and before freeze up. I don't know if they're willing to sell at this time. They're more interested in farming than they are selling. But as Todd had mentioned, clearly we have the ability to get this done to serve that area, and that's key. They need a sewer in order to build.
Well, wasn't Outlaw D part of the initial plan for that whole housing development? We were going to start with A, B, keep on going.
Right. Yeah, that was left as an outline.
So D was the last development then, if all the other ones filled up?
Yep, the city always,
Go ahead, Russ.
the city always intended, Councilman Grams, that we would market Outlot D for private development. The city, our phase 1, 2, and 3 lie south of that extended, Clark Street, but our intent had always been that we would seek private development for Outlot D. We originally thought perhaps it would be, desirable for those $400,000+ single-family homes. But we offered, I thought, a fair price. We offered some other things, and it ultimately didn't develop that way.
Mayor and members, from an infrastructure standpoint, if I may, from an infrastructure standpoint, the area that you see shaded has always been intended to be the location of sewerage and a roadway. It is a matter of time when development occurs. Any sewer that would be put in this area would benefit the properties both to the north and the south at some point in the future if development would occur. This is the location where sewer has been planned since this area was developed. This is not a deviation from that plan.
So there really wasn't any infrastructure put in, just planned whenever that development would occur.
That is correct. Infrastructure will be placed when development was imminent.
And at that point, then the developer would be factored in the price that they would pay, would the infrastructure would be factored in either through some source of financing or tax increment financing. Is that correct?
In this instance, this sewer would be financed through your wastewater fund, either through use of cash or through issuance of a small amount of debt. This is a project that is around 150, maybe 160, maybe 130, maybe $170,000. And so that would be the financing for the project. Assessments would be applied as utilization occurred and additional development would take place. Both the property owners north and south, again, would benefit from this in that ultimately that's where the design for roadway and sewer and other infrastructure is intended to go. And when development occurred, they would help pay the city back for those costs, just as any developer would. This is not a substantial deviation from any of those policies and plans that you've had in place.
Steve, if you can hear me.
The current owners in that area that may have an issue with the easement, were they informed or did they ever make an effort to see what the future plans of Travis Green was supposed to be?
Mayor and members, this issue related to the development of Traverse Green has been talked about by the council on multiple occasions. There's been notices, there's been platting, there's been review by planning and zoning. These are public meetings, publicly noticed. And so as indicated earlier by Russ, Pete has had direct conversation with these folks over the last couple of weeks. And so frankly, this is the council. Previous councils have been concerned about the use of eminent domain, and from a staff perspective, we understand that. However, without sewer being put into this location, any development north of the line of the southerlymost line of Outlot D, any of that area would not have sewer in the future. Again, this has been part of your comprehensive plan for infrastructure development since probably 2005 comprehensive plan.
Steve, if I can...
Well, I understand all that, Todd. You're coming off like you're trying to be defensive, and that's not the case. What I'm talking about is I'm just trying to figure out, or not me, I'm just only speculating that this isn't brand new news to these people. They have had the opportunity, and whether they chose to use it or not is not up to you or me. They have to make their own initiative. That's all. Like I said, I'm not trying to be confrontational or anything of that nature.
But Steve, this you asked earlier.
So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, Steve, you asked earlier about why we didn't do something before. Almost from day one with the other part of Traverse Green, we put out requests for proposals for building on this property. We aren't going to put infrastructure in until we know what the developer's going to do. It would be, not prudent to do that. And that's what we're looking at now is, hey, we've got somebody that wants to develop this, so now we have to go through with a plan that matches what they're going to do. And the owners, for whatever reason, they may decide, hey, it's not worth it, or whatever the case may be, and maybe everything will be just fine. We just have to make sure that everyone knows what our options are in this situation. Anyone else have any more comments?
I know that, Mr. Mayor, but it's all of a sudden I'm feeling that you think I'm challenging. That's not the issue.
No,
It's a matter
no,
of
I didn't mean that at all, Steve.
and
Steve,
tell council members what's going on, and not to be confrontational with anybody. I was involved in all those discussions from the get-go, Mr. Mayor.
But no, I didn't think,
on.
Steve, I didn't think you were being confrontational. I'm sorry if it came off that way, but I did not think you were being confrontational. I'm just trying to give a little history as to how these things develop. Anybody else have any other comments? If not, the resolution authorizing execution of purchase agreement for the sale of the eastern 12.8 acres of land of Outlot D appears on page 72. Is there a motion for approval?
Carrie Johnson, so moves.
Ed will second it.
Carrie 1, Ed 2. Any other questions? Todd, I have one that I wrote down that I forgot about. How does this affect our debt service on this property for the Traverse Green property?
This would not affect our debt service on the Traverse Green property. The question was, does it impact the debt service on Traverse Green? It does not. If we do use debt to fund any improvement of this nature, it would be done separately through the fund, not through Traverse Green.
Okay. So this isn't go to pay off that, any of this would be...
So the sale of the property
Yes.
would go towards any debt that you have currently.
That's what I'm referring to.
Yeah, so the approximately $120,000 that you'd receive through the sale would go into the fund that's designated for Traverse Green.
Right, okay. Which is helpful because that makes up for a few lots anyway that,
Yes.
we need to pay for some things on. So, anyway, any other questions or comments? Call the roll, please, Barb.
Councilmember Bruflat,
Aye.
Councilmember DeVos,
Aye.
Mayor Zeman,
Aye.
Councilmember Ed Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Noel,
Aye.
Councilmember Carrie Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Grams.
Aye.
Resolution is approved. Next up, we have a request for a couple of business license applications. Todd?
Mayor and members, the information is included on page 73 with the resolution on page 74. One is for a tree worker license for Ironwood Tree Service. The second is for soft drink license for Mountain Home Hospitality, doing business as Taco John's. They purchased the Taco John's and require a soft drink license.
Questions? If not, the resolution approving the business license applications for the tree worker and the soft drink appear on page 74. Is there a motion for approval?
Ed will make a motion to
Noel will
approve.
move.
Ed will second.
Shannon 1, Ed 2. Any questions now? Call the roll, please, Barb.
Councilmember DeVos,
Aye.
Mayor Zeman,
Aye.
Councilmember Ed Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Noel,
Aye.
Councilmember Carrie Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Grams,
Aye.
Councilmember Bruflat.
Aye.
Resolution is approved. That concludes our new business. Next, we have reports. I don't have a thing to add. Todd, up to you.
Mayor and members, since the start of COVID, I've done a regular report. I'll do an abbreviated one based on the time of the meeting tonight. I do want to mention that changes continue in the operations of the community center. And as some of you have seen, the track is now open and other areas are opening as a part of that. So we want to make sure that all of you know, and any of the public that might be watching, to certainly check our website or Facebook, or certainly call the rec department if you have an interest in utilizing the facilities, as the utilization opportunities opportunities are changing on a regular basis. I also want to mention that the pool has been pretty busy, the weather's been hot, and so our numbers feel good under the current circumstance. And as far as I know, people are having a good time at the pool, so we really appreciate that and really encourage people to register in advance for utilization of the pool. We continue to do employee screening on a daily basis. We've talked about this in the past, but just wanted to assure all of you and assure any of our patrons or customers that as they come into the facilities, that our staff is screened every morning. Temperatures are taken and the basic 5 or 6 questions are asked on a regular basis, again, every morning that we are in operation. As the mayor illustrated earlier, we are in line for some COVID funding through the CARES Act. We will continue to look at ways to utilize those dollars the best way possible for our community. And as I've mentioned, the groundwork for that, the rules and the guidance has changed over time and continues to evolve. So our view of this will continue to evolve. As some of you know, we've been assigned $901,000. That's been illustrated in some of the media as we get that money, that the council gets that money. That is not true. We have to justify expenditures related to that amount of money, and right now, I don't know that we reach $901,000, folks. We want to be good stewards of the resources that are provided and have appropriate justification under the rules to be able to utilize those dollars. Any dollars that we don't use go back, and so we want to just make sure that folks are aware of that. Goal session discussion. I won't go much into this one other than I appreciate the council's time for about 3 hours and 20 minutes a Monday or so ago. And item number 4, items of vital importance were updated based on that discussion and a discussion at your last workshop on Monday night. That information is included in your packet on page 75, and I hope it illustrates your discussion from last Monday night. This is really important stuff and connects the vision that you have for the community to action within the community. And so I appreciate the time that you're willing to spend on this. You'll see that we'll be promoting the flow of this, the modifications that were made in the hot sheet and video blogs and other places, as well as in the packet tonight, and as well as at your council meeting tonight and other places. So I wanted to mention that. Let me go back to item number 3, Mr. Mayor. As you mentioned previously, under the June 30th emergency meeting, the council changed its location or the venue for the primary election on August 11th. Previously, that was going to be at the Armory, but due to maintenance at the building, it has been moved to Johnson Hall at the fairgrounds. I know at our house, we received notice of that, so folks that are impacted by that change either should have or will be very shortly receiving a postcard notice. It's kind of a green postcard notice, but we want to make sure that people are aware where they can go to vote in the primary election on August 11th. Mr. Mayor, that's all I have for you and the council this evening.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions or anything to add? Steve?
I just have one, Todd. Have there been any issues with at the swimming pool? People not understanding what the rules are, and any issues with people challenging rules or anything?
I am unaware of any significant issues. Certainly, we've had people that have come to the door that might be unaware of the issues, and then our role is to educate them, but I'm unaware of any significant or confrontational issues related to utilization of the pool.
Good.
Okay, thank you.
I had one minor complaint about the pool. Perhaps you could pass this along to Joey. That the employees were not social distancing, and so I wonder if explaining to the public the pod system and how that's in place to kind of keep certain, employees together that work together more regularly, minimizing their exposure to other employees. I think maybe that's what he was seeing, but I wasn't there, but I just wanted to pass that along.
Councilmember Carrie Johnson mentioned that she had a concern raised by a constituent. That employees at the pool were not practicing the appropriate social distancing, and that it might be of value for us to promote additional understanding of the pod system, or what sometimes we've called platooning system with the staff, and that might address some of those concerns. So thanks for sharing that. I'll make sure to share that with Joey.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Emily?
Just really quick, we've already talked about this, but I think that we as a council should come up with a mandatory mask policy for the city of St. Peter, similar to what Mankato has done. And so if we can discuss that very soon, I think that would be a benefit.
Todd is making a note. Brad?
I am. Yep.
I was just going to echo Emily's. If it would be helpful, because in these days, time is of the essence. I don't know if, Todd, you'd be able to look at what Mankato has and see if there might be something that might be drawn up for us that would be similar from a discussion, so that we can discuss it next week.
Mayor, members, I certainly can put that on the agenda for your next workshop, and there are certainly some things that are different between Mankato and St. Peter that I think might be valuable to address and understand as a part of that. And certainly the process to move forward is different in Mankato as a home rule charter city than it is with you as a statutory A city. So certainly I can address some of those at your workshop coming up.
Anyone else? Carrie?
I just wanted to say I'm supportive of a mask mandate. However, if the governor makes a decision on this within the next couple weeks, I would love it if this was taken up by the state, just because this issue does create such division in our communities. So if it's something that's in the pipeline at the state level, you know, I think I wouldn't want to wait too long, but just to understanding where that's at the state level, I think is important too.
I hope you could all hear that. I think if I can be more concise, Council Member Carrie Johnson's commentary was this is being reviewed by the state issue, or by the state of Minnesota, and that it is her hope that the state as a whole takes up this issue, and that while she believes it's important for us to continue to think about this and move forward, it would be her preference that it is done by the state of Minnesota, and that if they take action in advance of the city council, that would be preferred.
You're really good at that.
All right. She said I was good at that. She gave me this again, so I'm okay.
Anyone else? I saw thumbs, but no hands. There's a hand. Shannon?
This is Shannon, and I have the same sentiment as Carrie. I know I had a chance to talk to Todd about this briefly last week, and definitely would much rather prefer that the governor do something, but we'll see what happens. We have no control over what he does.
Sure you do. You have a voice? Call him up.
The mayor's suggestion is that we do have a voice. We can certainly call or communicate that with the governor.
Anyone else have anything to add? If Steve?
The only concern I have relative to masks is if our honorable mayor wears one, there's a good possibility that he would be arrested and thrown in jail. So that would be a major concern.
That is my concern too, because it's happened to me once already.
The mayor shares that concern. It's happened to him in the past.
Oh, no.
Anyway, all right. Anybody else have anything fruitful to add? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
Ed will make a motion to adjourn.
Carrie Johnson will second.
Ed 1, Carrie 2, all in favor of adjournment, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? We are adjourned.
Good night, everyone. Thank you very much.
Good night, Pete.
Night, John boy.
Good night, guys.